Hey, welcome. It's been a long time. Sorry I left you. Welcome to the Bring Worth Show. I'm so excited you guys came through. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. I'm here to serve you as a non-traditional entrepreneur, a side hustler, a solopreneur, anything that makes you different and perhaps undervalued and underserved in the communities that you're trying to make an impact in. I'm here to help you on that journey. You're watching the Bring It Worth Show. Bring It Worth TV comes to you most Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. I'm here in Las Vegas. It's not hot, but we have some weird smoke going on with with the California fires. Blessing to my California family, both chosen family and blood family. I love you all out there. Hopefully, you guys are doing better. It's wild right now, so part of my voice. That's part of the reason why I have a gravelly voice. Got the Deborah Winger thing going on because of all the smoke outside. Shout out to my allergist. I love you. You can subscribe to Damon Brown's Bring Your Worth TV for free right now. This episode 393, I believe. We'll get into that. So there's 400 or so episodes you can get into right now to help you as a side hustler, a solopreneur, or otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. I know your journey. I was a primary caregiver of my first son. At the same time, I became an entrepreneur, did two startups. The second startup called Cuddler became the number one app in the world, ended up selling it shortly after my wife and I's son's second birthday. What a journey. I got the gray hairs now, so that was a little while ago, but it's beautiful to kind of see and support so many of y'all who are on a similar journey where you're doing things differently. You aren't necessarily a Harvard grad. You're not necessarily a straight white guy that comes from money. It's like you have these opportunities that you're making for yourself. You're building your own table. There's a beautiful opportunity that you have right now. I'm glad to be a part of it. Hopefully, this will help you on your journey with that. I have 27 books. My latest book is called The Complete Bring Your Worth Collection. It has all the bestsellers in there. Most of the business books that I've done in the past 8 years, including The Ultimate Bites as Entrepreneur, which y'all get made a bestseller, as well as Bring Your Worth, of course, the eponymous book that the show was named after. And then lastly, my personal favorite, Build From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, to Nourish the World, which actually came out in the middle of us being in the deepest part of the pandemic. And so it talks about how you can create things based on limited resources. This is really a gift to y'all, because this was not necessarily our own publishing company, but putting it together, there's so many of y'all that I worked with that wanted to have the whole collection in one piece. Here you are, you got it. Thank you so much for the support that you guys have given and the love that you've given when it came out. If you want to listen to the audiobook, of course, it's available on all platforms, including Amazon and so forth. But you can also listen to the audiobook right now, not while we're talking, but right now. It's actually available in its entirety, unabridged, unadulterated. 8 hours of insights from the book series are available right now at the link below. That also will help you support the channel and give the channel some love. But most importantly, I want to give y'all some love and give an opportunity to help y'all. I'm a business coach, and some of y'all are overseas right now as we speak. Safe travels to y'all. You know who I'm talking to. And have fun out there. And again, be safe. But you might not have access to Audible or whatever platform you happen to get your audiobooks from. And you might not be able to travel with your books. And I'm fortunate where I have a lot of stuff on Kindle. But there's some books, and I'll get into that in a second, how you can travel more with your books and get those insights. I'm fortunate enough where I have the resources to have 3 or 4 copies of some of my favorite books, like Dante's Inferno, like a lot of Brene Brown's book, a lot of Adam Grant's books. Shout out to Adam. And so you might not have those opportunities. I want to make sure that you can access it wherever you are. So it's 8 hours. It's a gift to y'all. Enjoy it. In case you missed it, I think it was last Sunday. I think it was Sunday. I think it was last Sunday. It was Start Freelance Writing Today, Step by Step Guide, episode 392, where it was actually several episodes, about an hour long of content talking about how to pitch your first freelance ideas, how to get paid, how to manage invoices, what the different contract structures are, all those things that I've learned and my colleagues have learned in the past, few decades that we've been freelance writing. And I'm a freelance writer for Playboy, the New York Post, AARP, the magazine. I was recently in Costco Connections, which is a free magazine that's sent to Costco members. So it went out to about, I think about 30 million of y'all worldwide. It was crazy numbers. So a lot of y'all reached out about coaching and all that stuff because I recently did a column in there about why you should get a business coach. Of course, I'm a business coach, so I understood. I've also been coached before. I'm taking all those insights as far as how I got into those publications, how I connected with those different editors and so forth, and boil it down into this hour-long program. Hopefully, you enjoy it and you get some good insight into it. All right, I'm so excited. I'm so excited about today. I'm literally clapping, right? Literally clapping. I'm so excited about today. 5 secrets to mastering change and transition. Woo! This has been a long time coming. I've actually been relatively quiet in the past few weeks as far as doing the live episodes. I usually do a live episode on Wednesday, but as you can tell, I'm in new digs. This is a new setup. I just put this bookcase together. It just came together like a few days ago. I'm still getting my books together, even though it's over my big head. And you see John Coltrane, at least you see his beautiful hands, and you see the beautiful hands of Jimmy up there. James Baldwin, happy 100th birthday to you, my friend. And but I'm still getting it organized. As I mentioned in my newsletter, you can get it at Join Damon on me. I have a lot more gray hair in my beard just through this summer. My kids are one of them's in middle school now, the other one's in late elementary school. And I remember when they were born and holding them as soon as they came out of my wife. So it's just like, whoo, the amount of change. And again, as I mentioned in my newsletter this morning, change has become a friend of mine. And we're going to talk about today how to handle change and handle transition. We're going to talk about the difference between change and transition. Those are two separate things, number one. Number two, we're going to talk about how to handle change in a positive and productive way. Third thing we're going to talk about, we're not numbers here. Third thing we're going to talk about is how we can handle transition, particularly when it's a difficult change. We'll get into that in a moment. And then we'll also talk about how to figure out that messy middle and where you should go from here and how to evaluate those steps. Super important episode. I'm going through a lot of change myself. So I wanted to, you know, I'm trying to be the reporter here. My background is journalism. I'm trying to be the reporter here. I'm like, I've been on the front lines of change this year. And yeah, these are how you handle change and transition. And of course, we'll get into the definition of what that means. First of all, shout out to Shortform. Thank you. Love y'all. I appreciate the support. Y'all made this episode possible. Shortform is your ultimate book reader companion. I move to the side. I have a ton of books behind my big head. I have more books back there. I have, you can ask don't ask my kids, but if you did talk to my kids, I have stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of books. As far as moving to the new office location, the couple of things I have, like my desk and all that, were easy. The problem was the books. The amount of books that I have are massive. Short form is the ultimate book reader or book lover, more accurately, guide or companion for two big reasons. Number one, it allows you to understand the books that you currently have better. Number two, it allows you to get the information in your books a lot faster. Let's hop in real quick and we'll go and do that. So let's see, present, share screen. Hopefully with the weird weather, everything will work. Hey, we're good to go. All right, so this is short form. I actually have a special deal that I negotiated with Shortform. So y'all have a free trial as BringYourWorth.tv listeners, viewers, however you happen to be get to catching this podcast, as well as getting at this as of this recording 20% off your first subscription. I believe it's annual, but you can go and check on that and see. Fantastic deal. It's worth your time. Here's Shortform. It basically gives you a synopsis, but a deeper synopsis of all of the popular books that you might have on your shelf. You see some of my joints here. Again, shout out to Adam, Liz, and shout out to Robert Greene. Hope you're doing well. What it does is it summarizes them, but at such a deep level that it's almost like a preview of what the book is about. Now, if you're my age, you're middle age or what have you, you're older, you've heard of Cliff Notes. This ain't Cliff Notes. I was never a big fan of Cliff Notes. No offense to them, but I was never a fan of them because it was like, this is what happened. It was like a equivalent of Wikipedia. No offense to Wikipedia. It has its place. This is completely different. This is a place that's saying, okay, we're going to go and break down the essence of all the things that are happening in here. And then we're going to allow you to, number one, understand the book better. So that if you want to go deeper, you can go buy the book. And number two, we're going to connect it in ways that you can't do from a traditional published book. So let's look at 48 Laws of Power. I already have it up here. Again, shout out to Robert Greene. As I go back and check out the 48 Laws of Power, which I've mentioned quite a few times in my best-selling series, the Complete Bring Your Worth collection, as well as with my recent book, Career Remix, where I interviewed Robert Greene. It's a fantastic book. The book is also massive. The 48 Laws of Power is a classic, came out about 25, maybe 30 years ago. I got it about 20 years ago. The book is like those old school dictionaries that I had in my house. Used to call it the Red Book. It's that thick. I remember I was doing an episode earlier this year, no lie, and I wanted to reference the 48 Laws of Power. Number one, I had the physical books. I like to have physical books. So I borrowed it. Someone borrowed it. I don't know where it is. So if you have it and you're watching, please give it back to me. I'm over here in Las Vegas. So I don't have the physical copy anymore. But even if I did, it will be hard to find this particular passage. And then it was another thing where I have the audiobook of it, which is a fantastic audiobook, very long. It's like 20 hours long. That's how long the book is. But it's like I can't skim through the whole thing. This was perfect. And I discovered short form earlier this summer. I was like, what's the one, which I think it's on screen right now? What's the one where it talks about you connecting with people before you need them? In other words, keep your networks fresh. It's like, oh, don't isolate yourself. Never isolate yourself when you come under pressure. This just cuts you off from the information you need and people who could help you. And when the real danger arises, you won't see it coming. I say that all the time. If you coach with me, I talk so much about connecting with other people. It gets to the principles because there's 48 principles, gets into one of them, and then talks about the sidebars. Like it's a great synopsis. In the regular book, this would be about maybe 6, 7, maybe 8 pages because it's storytelling and other type of nuances, which the original book is fabulous. That's why I have several copies. But if you need the essence of it, this is great. That's one. The second part about it is that if you end up let's look up Robert Greene. And apologies for my internet. It should take a second. The nuances of moving to a new office. Robert Greene. So Robert, and it's his joints. Mastery, The Art of Seduction, The 50th Law, Shout to 50 Cents, Curtis Jackson, all that stuff. But here's where it gets crazy. And then it starts connecting you to the podcast, where he's been on 5 episodes of Modern Wisdom. I've never heard of that podcast. Maybe you guys are fans. Then, of course, Jay Shetty, I've heard of him. Diary of a CEO, fantastic. I love the work that you're doing, Stephen. We'll connect one of these days, I'm sure. I'm not as familiar with Theo Vaughn as far as him doing good podcasts, but evidently he's doing serious podcasts now if he has Robert Greene on there. So then you don't just have the essence of the book, but you have the essence of the person, the work they're doing. I know with Elizabeth Green, what I had, or not Elizabeth Green, Elizabeth Gilbert, looking at Green. Elizabeth Gilbert, who also been through her Big Magic, one of the best books I've ever read about creativity. And she happened to have an article, I think she did with HBR, Harvard Business Review. So if you click on that and go through there, then she has her stuff on that. Of course, she's done the podcast circuit several times. Same thing with Adam Grant. And so it doesn't just connect you to the book itself of Think Again, Big Magic, or 48 Laws of Power. It also connects you to almost like the root or the extended play, as we used to say back in the day with DJs, that EP or that extended play of it. It's like the long play just continues. So you can do a lot of your good research on this too. Anyway, big fan of short form. Thank you so much for supporting the show today. If you want to go at special Bring Your Worth TV discount, do it right now. I don't know how long it's going to last, to be honest, but you can get a free trial that's going to last. But you also get 20% off if you do it right now. Go and click on it. And of course, you'll be supporting the show with that too. So again, thanks so much to Shortform for doing that. All right. So you're like, change and transition. Damon, what's the difference? There's a difference, big difference between change and transition. And we're going to break it down. And because of the difference between the two, it's important to go ahead and address them in a different kind of way. Often we'll say change and transition, and we'll use them interchangeably or at the same time. And they're actually separate. Special shout out to Bernadette Johnson Thank you so much for helping me on this journey as far as understanding the difference between change and transition. You actually learn more about her at bernadjohnson.com. I'll go ahead and throw it into the link in a second, but love you and I appreciate you always. All right, so what is the difference between change and transition? Really simple. A change is something that's external. A transition is something that's internal. A change is external. A transition is internal. A change is you start a new job. A transition is you're not at home anymore, sad because you can't find a job. Suddenly you have something to do 9 to 5 every day. How are you transitioning psychologically into that place? How are you processing the emotions around that? Change has to do with something external. It could be initiated by you, it could be initiated by someone else, but something that's external. It's something that's tangible that shifts. The transition is the stuff that's on the inside. It's a little bit messier. It's the stuff that you need to work with. Some of the biggest challenges that people face, whether it's leaders or folks that work with me that are going through big changes, is that we work on the change, but we don't work on the transition. We say, for instance, I just moved to this new office. So you go and say, okay, well, do we do we need boxes and we need a car or a truck and do we need movers? I don't think we need movers. I don't think we have that much stuff, so we don't need movers. And okay, and then we're going to go ahead and we'll have to be offline for a little while, which is why I haven't had the show for a few weeks. So it's like okay, well then we got to do that. Like that's managing the change. It's practical. It's relatively simple. It's the logistics. It's the list, the to do stuff. It's moving stuff from here to there or back and forth. It's whatever it's like whatever needs to be done physically. The practical side of it, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It wouldn't be I wouldn't be possible to move into this office without having the boxes and transportation from my old office here, et cetera, et cetera. The transition though is what are the cultural changes that are going to happen because we're not in the old office anymore, we're in the new office. We're used to going across the street to the park and getting some fresh air when things are stressful, with the work. Okay, so then how are we going to do that? How are we going to let that stress out? How are we going to get that fresh air? Not everything can come into this new office. So there's a sense of loss. So then we need to grieve, not too dramatic of a word. We need to grieve that loss. There's a certain rhythm or cadence that we're used to having because we're used to having that office. Now we have the new office. So what do? We need to process those emotions and those feelings. That part's a transition. And in some ways, we master change pretty well. We find ways to cope with change, healthy, unhealthy, whatever. As humans, we're fairly adaptable. We find ways to cope with it. Transition, though, basically says, how are you going to cope with it? What, again, is the loss? And as a lot of change leaders and transition leaders will talk about, it's like what's going to stay the same, what's going to be different, and who's going to lose what. That last part is important. So there is a sense of loss when people go through any type of change and transition. The change doesn't master or work with that loss. The change just is what's different now. The transition says emotionally, what are we going to lose? If I have a favorite sandwich shop, we're a very food forward family, so I have a lot of food examples. If I have a favorite sandwich shop that's in this neighborhood, and then I find another office that's a great opportunity, the price is right, et cetera, et cetera. From a change standpoint, it's like, great, sounds like a good change, but I can't get my favorite sandwich. And the family that owns the sandwich shop, I'm not going to connect with them anymore. That's the transition part. That's the loss. Transition isn't always about loss, but loss is often a part of it. And if we're not processing the loss that happens with the change, then number one, we might not be able to do the right calculus to figure out how much we're actually going to lose with that change. Number two, we could have stuff that's unprocessed that just sits there. I look at it like bad milk, or if you have, stuff in your fridge, back to the food examples, but if you have stuff in your fridge that always in the back of your fridge, and my family and I had one fridge where the the um, the ledges, the shelves, ledges, the shelves wouldn't go all the way back. There was a little gap. And so as my kids are stuffing stuff in the fridge, and then, we're in a hurry, stuff, and inevitably some stuff will get shoved back there, and there might be a little bit of cheese that falls back there and it's lost. And then we finally clean the fridge every other month, whatever, and we find it back there. That's what those feelings are like if you're just dealing with the change, but not the transition. The transition basically says we're going to process all this stuff. We're going to work on all this stuff. We're going to show up in this certain way. That's what transition is. And so often we end up focusing more on the change rather than transition. As one person put it, change is done to you, and transition is something that you have to do. No one's going to say you have to transition, but someone will say things have to change. One you have way more control over than the other. And unfortunately, we often forfeit our control when it comes to our transitions because we don't realize we have control over it anyway. As they say, you can't control your reaction to things, but you can control your response. Change is what we react to, but our response is transition. One of my favorite books on transition, I read this last week because I was going through a lot of transitions, and I ate this up. Like, proof is in the pudding. See all those dog ears? I was putting my kids to bed, and there's like the bedtime story. I was literally reading it to them. I couldn't put it down. I read it in like 2 days, and started reading it over again. Fantastic book. Again, highly recommend it. Shout out to Burnett Johnson for recommending this book. Transitions by William Bridges, and I forget his widow's name, Susan Bridges. Shout out to both of y'all. Rest in peace to William Bridges. This is a 40th anniversary edition. Again, I'm middle aged, so this book came out probably I was starting to come out the womb. It's a classic book. I'm so angry that I just read it now. It would have made my life so much easier. It's so ridiculously good. This is where that definition as far as difference between change and transition comes out. And as the late author talks about, there's a lot of books that talk about change, how to deal with change, how to do the change. But none, as far as I know, at that time, were about transition. So we can focus on the external as much as we want. External's cool, the external matters. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're not working on the internal at the same time, mm. Mm. Yeah. Again, and with my work, I've seen it firsthand, and it's just crazy when you see these moments, and it's heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff. All right. If you want to get more insight as far as with this work, you want to read or watch my episode on Begin Emotional Intelligence. I think I ended up losing my comments here, so I'll put it in there for you guys. Begin Emotional Intelligence. There it is. Sorry, I think my tech is running a little bit slow today. Speaking of transition, Begin Emotional Intelligence, Brene Brown. Brene Brown for beginners. One of my favorite episodes. It's basically taken all the good stuff that I've talked about in regards to Brene Brown, whether it's gold-plated grit or difference between and shame and guilt. Um, Understanding the different dynamics of our emotional landscape. If you want to understand. See, this is my tongue again. Better have some coffee. If you're going to understand transition more, this is a great place to start. Ah, that's good. Shout out to Saigon Coffee. I love y'all over there. So, what about y'all? What kind of change transition are y'all dealing with? Is that an insight to you as far as knowing the difference between change and transition? Are there certain changes that you've gone through that you realize you didn't really transition, that you still have baggage back there during the change it still needs to be transitioned. We're going to get into it more later on this episode, but I'd love to hear your take on the comments, and I'd love to break it down and maybe see how we can support each other. Again, I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. Man, tongue tied today. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. I help side hustlers, solopreneurs, otherwise non-traditional entrepreneurs, just like yourself. You're watching Brainworth TV Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can subscribe below. All right, so this is an important one. What are the 3 steps to changing my life? What are the 3 steps changing my life? It sounds really big and kind of vague, and I respect that it feels that way, but it really comes down to these 3 things. A lot of this is discussed in the book Switch, another fantastic book. This is more about change rather than transition. We'll get into that in a second. Shout out to Dan and Chip Heath. So, if we're going to break down the 3 steps to change your life and you want to make your life better, assuming it's a good change, then it comes down to this great analogy that I learned in the book. Again, learned in the book Switch, but it's originally from Jonathan Haidt. You might know his name. It's Haidt. He's gotten popular a lot, really popular this year. Where I think his book is called The Anxiety Generation, where it's basically about um, um, tweens and particularly teenagers who are leaning so much on social media and on cell phones, and that actually might be making them more anxious, or vice versa. They might be on cell phones more because they're anxious. But that's part of his argument and discussion. I think he had a cover story in the New York Times last month or two. Very popular book. One of his books before that was about happiness, and he used this analogy that was covered again in this fantastic book, Switch by Dan and Chip Heath. The analogy is the rider and the elephant. So I've ridden a horse before for my wedding. Whew, that was quite an experience. I'd never ridden a horse before, so I came in on a horse. If you've ridden horses before, or if you've ridden elephants before, then you know where I'm about to go. There's the rider, and then there's the elephant. Let's just stick with the elephant rather than the horse. The rider is the part of us that is logical, it's efficient, it has the to-do list and a checklist. It knows that frankly change needs to happen. We're going in this direction. It's generally cool-headed and wants to find the best path. Again, it's the rider. It's guiding. Like about to do the electric slide. All right, rest in peace to for Frankie Beverly, by the way. Speaking of electric slide, I love you. All right, so it's like a rider. You're going, right? Then you have the elephant. The elephant is what you're riding. The elephant is emotional, it is intense, it is powerful, powerful, powerful. It's allowing you, it's allowing itself to be ridden. It, whether it's explicit or not. If you're riding on the elephant, you got its permission in some form. It's allowing you to do so. Both of these are how we operate. The rider, again, is very logical, trying to be efficient, says, well, we know this must be done. It's right in front of our eyes. The elephant says, well, I'm emotional and I'm big and I'm actually bigger than you. And if there's like old school, like our old school cartoon, if there's like a mouse on the floor and the elephant gets scared, all bets are off. It's running things. The elephant is running things. The rider is kind of our human mask, basically saying, you know what? Everything's cool. I'm a logical person. Yeah, of course I should get up and go to work. And I have to wake up at 6:30 in the morning, and I need to go ahead and leave this time to do the commute. And then of course I'm going to have a very reasonable lunch. I'm not going to stop at Wendy's, and no offense at Wendy's, but I'm not going to stop at Wendy's. And then I'm going to come home, and then I'm going to go and exercise, and then I'm going to go to bed at a reasonable time. The elephant is like, no, actually, you're going to stop at Wendy's, and then you're not going to go to the gym, and then you're going to stay up on your favorite streaming service. That's what you're going to do. That's because the elephant's like, no, that's what I'm going to do. When we deal with change, and I'd say to a lesser extent transition, but focus on change, then it's a tension between the rider and the elephant. Again, this is Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. Shout out to him, mentioned in the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. We'll talk about the book more in a second. So that's kind of the analogy that we're working with. That's why we can't just say, okay, I'm going to Getting back to the gym analogy, I'm going to go to the gym every day, and then somehow you're not at the gym. I'm going to be more patient with my kids when they're getting on my nerves, and suddenly, you know, you're flying off the handle. You're like, well, that wasn't that's not logical. Well, no, because we're actually not logical people. And remember, the rider and the elephant, there's this um, analogy or the symbolism for a reason. The elephant isn't the logical one, the rider is. So we're driven by emotion, we're driven by passion. So in this wonderful book, Switch, they break down the 3 steps to changing your life or changing something in your life if you want to make it less grandiose. Number one is to direct the rider. Remember, you're riding. Number two is to motivate the elephant to keep the elephant going. And last is to shape the path, to give it direction. This is why. And this is really why I'm bringing it up. Fantastic stuff. I'm going to go and throw the link in the book as well, to the book as well, so you guys know what's happening. All right. So when it comes to directing the rider, this is one of my favorite passages in the book. What looks like a people problem is actually a situation problem. So if you're having a hard time making a change in your life, it looks like a people problem is actually a situation problem, right? Again, back to the food analogies. If you want to eat healthier, but you have 20 packs of Oreos in your fridge or cabinet or whatever, what is the first thing that people are taught to do if they want to eat better or be healthier? Throw out the junk. So junk is in the house, then that's fine. So in that sense, it's a situation problem. The situation is this, that, and the third. I have people that I adore who have gone through Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the challenges with AA, and if you're familiar with the um, the 12-step process or other types of addictions, one of the things they talk about is it's actually not a chemical problem per se. It is, but the real problem after you get over the chemical stuff is the social part. Because if you have a hard time making friends, and some of the ways that you grease that social wheel is by drinking, then you're going to run into a lot of people who might have the same issue, and they become your friend group. Where's your friend group hang out? At the bar. So then you're not just letting go of the alcohol, but you're also letting go of your friend group. So if you focus just on alcohol, you're going to be lonely as hell because Barney and whomever else is still at the bar. So it makes it harder to change your life. That's what they're getting at. We look at things as a people problem. They just can't do this, or they don't really want to do this. But in actuality, it's the environment, it's the situation. So if you're trying to make a change in your life, how can you actually make yourself successful? Build up the environment so that you're actually ready for success. How can you make that happen? That's in the environment. And that might be part of leading on other people or setting up things or having conversations. We're going to get into conversations in a minute when we talk about transitions, but having conversations with loved ones or people that are supporting you saying, okay, I need this from you, or we can't do that anymore. We need to do this. It's not a people problem, it's a situation problem. That's what it means directing the rider, allowing your logical self to take over. But it's a lot easier to do if you actually have an environment that's going to be more supportive of that. We can't always build up all the support that we want or frankly need, but we definitely need to have it on our radar. If we're having a hard time, that might be part of the problem. The second thing is, I love this one. What looks like laziness is actually exhaustion. When we have a hard time making a change, what looks like laziness is actually exhaustion. Let's go back to the Oreos in the cabinet. And it's like, no, I'm going to eat healthier, no more Oreos. And then the Oreos, the double stuff, whatever your vice happens to be. I think Oreos are okay. I have other vices, but you know what I'm saying? It's like you hear them, and it's like they're right there. And it's like you have a rough day. Maybe I'll have an Oreo or two, whatever. But that's not laziness that that you end up succumbing to the Oreos. That's a lack of willpower. You're tired. They talk about this a lot in the book Switch, where they have actual scientific studies where it's not about you actually saying not having the willpower to do it. It's actually you do have the willpower. It's just it takes so much willpower that you're exhausting yourself. And then we end up giving up. So again, this falls a little bit back in the environment again, as well as actually being gentle and kind with ourselves. If we're gentle and kind with ourselves, then we can say, you know what? Yeah, I had a couple Oreos. It's taken a lot of willpower to not do it, but I'm doing okay. And I didn't have 10 Oreos. I just had two. So it's a level of grace, as we talked about earlier in the episode. And I talked about this with Brene Brown's Guide to Emotional Intelligence. Again, the link is below. But she talks about this, and I talk about this as far as giving yourself grace and self-flagellating yourself. Like it's not gonna get you there. And in fact, it's more likely to reverse those changes because you're just gonna get tired. So especially here in the Western world and particularly here in America, there's so much dialogue as far as people not changing because they're lazy. It's like, well, they're arguing, well, no, actually, they're not changing because their willpower is tired. Imagine having to fight something every single day that your natural habits go towards. And you've had that habit or whatever for a while. That's hard. So how can we again change the environment and also be gentler and kinder to the people? So motivating the elephant and actually helping people figure out what can motivate them to make that change versus chastising them when they're tired. There's a big difference in that. So number one, it's direct the rider. So that means what looks like a people problem. People, Peter Piper picked a pecker. What looks like a people problem is actually a situation problem. What looks like a people problem is actually a situation problem. So you gotta change the environment as much as possible. Number two, you have to motivate the elephant. What looks like laziness is actually exhaustion. So how can you get the energy back? Part of the reason, or part of the things you can do, in my opinion, is to give grace when changes don't work as quickly as you'd like. Again, you're steering an elephant. Your passion is saying, yes, let me eat the Oreos. Your rider's saying, no, we're not going to eat the Oreos. That's a tug of war. And often the elephant's going to win. So if you understand that, then logically you can say, oh, okay, well, I'm not right. Sometimes I'm gonna fall off the wagon or whatever the equivalent is. Sometimes I'm not gonna make it. And that's okay to give yourself grace for that and find ways to motivate yourself so that your more passionate side could be more involved with it. Maybe instead of having double stuffed Oreos, maybe you find um, a really sweet fruit that gives you that same dopamine rush that you get from sugar, or some way to compensate for that that makes sense. The last one, number three, is to shape the path, shape the direction that things are supposed to be going. What looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. Love that line. What looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. So I got two kids. They're 8 and 11. One's in just started middle school, and one is in late elementary school. And they lose stuff all the time. If you raise 8-year-old or 11-year-old, I know you're shocked, but they lose stuff all the time. One of the things that me and my co-parenting partner do is we create systems so that for the eldest, the bookcase or bookcase behind me, the book bag, and then they play an instrument. So their instrument is right next to the book bag. All that stuff is as organized as possible. Now, giving them responsibility to organize some of it, but at least the basic placeholders are there. So the chance of them forgetting their instrument when they're running inevitably late for school, going to sixth grade, the chance of them losing that instrument or forgetting that instrument is a lot smaller. Why? Because we make sure I get the term right. Shape the path. I love that term. Shape the path. What looks like resistance. Why isn't my son taking his instrument? Does he not want to play it? Is actually a lack of clarity. Oh, he was in such a hurry and he was doing 2 million things, he didn't notice that his instrument was there. Why not put it in a place, or he'll put it in a place where he puts it down, where it's going to be all the time, so he knows that's the place for his instrument, so he doesn't have to think about it. Boom, path done, and now he's not forgetting his instrument. Real life examples. Like, I'm not making this stuff up. Real life examples as far as with the instrument. That's how change is enacted. Number one, you have to understand that what looks like a people problem is actually a situation problem. You have to change their environment. Number two, what looks like laziness is actually exhaustion. Don't put yourself in situations where you have to use up your willpower because the willpower is going to lose. The elephant's going to win when it comes to analogy of the elephant and the rider. And lastly, what looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. If you don't have a clear path or a clear system for you to make that change, then of course it's going to be harder and you may never make the change because it's taking too much energy. Fantastic book. It's called Switch. Just started reading it last week. Fantastic book. This one, again, is about change. This previous one I was talking about is about transition. We're about to get into transition again. Change, though, is the outer stuff. I need to do this. This needs to change. How do I make myself change? That's what this book is about. Fantastic pick. If you want to go in and watch Bringworth episode that talks about this, I recommend Reverse Clause, the biggest Stoic secret. It's from another one of my favorite books, Daily Stoic. Uh, ah, love my new bookcase, Daily Stoic. Shout out to Ryan and Stefan. Hope y'all both are doing well. Fantastic book. This chapter, tearing up my books here. This episode is only about 4 or 5 minutes, and it talks about my favorite chapter in this 365 chapter book. It's called Daily Stoic for a reason. My favorite chapter is about the reverse clause and about making decisions. And sometimes we're not willing to make decisions because we put too much weight on the impact of that decision. And sometimes those decisions aren't as impactful as we think they are. That's what it's about. Me explaining the episode will be longer than the episode itself. The episode's like 4 minutes. All the links are below if you want to check it out after our conversation today. Again, I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown, here to help you as a side hustler, excuse me, solopreneur, and otherwise not just entrepreneur. Sorry, that coffee's getting me today. You're watching the Bring It Worth show at bringitworth.tv. Come to you regularly on Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. I don't need more coffee, and at the same time, I need more coffee. Go figure. You, you subscribe to Bring Your Worth TV for free. For free. This is episode 393. Y'all been rolling with me. It'll be 4 years this winter. Almost 400 episodes. It'll be 400 episodes probably by then. Well before the holiday season. Enjoy. Dive in. I made it all for y'all. It's literally hundreds of hours of live conversations, some interviews, including with um, lots of lots of interviews to go through and would take a long time. But handful of interviews, me being interviewed as well as me interviewing other people, fantastic folks that were gracious enough to come onto the program, particularly early on in the program, as well as a lot of audiobook editions of the books that I was talking about, including the complete Bring It Worth collection. The link is below. Enjoy yourselves. Have fun. This is really for y'all. So, are there particular changes that you're going through in your life that you're struggling with? Are there changes that you've gone through that you have particular insights or hints that you want to share with, with the audience or with myself? I'd love to hear what you got going on. The lines are open. Feel free to jump into the comments. Call it a break. All right. How do I create a healthy transition through a rough change? Let's make sure that this is clear. There's a difference between change and transition. Change is something that happens. You move to a new office, you go to a new city, you're dating a new person, you have a child. Those things are changes. Transitions are the internal stuff that actually gets you from in a healthful manner, as in healthy manner, from one change to the next, from the before to the after. How do you get through that? That's such an important key part of it. We want to talk about how to have healthy transitions, particularly when we're having a rough change. And change comes down to basically three different things. And this is based on, again, the book Transitions. by William and Susan Bridges. Shout out to both of them. Rest in peace to William Bridges. Fantastic book. I talked about at the top of the show if you want to rewind it. And so, rewind it, showing my age. If you want to go back to the beginning, hit the VCR button, go for it. There are three parts to every single transition. There's the ending, there's a neutral zone, and there's the beginning. Now you notice the order is a little bit different than what we're told, particularly here in America. The order we usually have is beginning, some type of messy middle, and then end, something ends, and then we start something new. What the Bridges, that's their last name, what the Bridges argue is that it's actually kind of the opposite. We go through an ending, a wrapping up, conclusion, and then there's this kind of what they call neutral zone. This messy, amorphous, hard to describe. You can't put your finger on it. Things that used to be comfortable are uncomfortable, as I talk about in the Bites of Entrepreneur, which is included in the collection. I talked about going through a phase in my life where I was almost like I was a toddler, because I had a toddler at the time. Again, my eldest was a toddler at the time, and how the clothes didn't quite fit, and the arms start getting awkward, and the legs don't seem to work as well. It's like you're growing, but you're not quite a kid, but you're not a baby anymore. That toddler stage, 2 to 3 years old, is just awkward, and that's how I felt career-wise, particularly after I sold my last startup, Cuddler, and so much of my identity was wrapped up into it. I didn't know what to do with it. You know what I mean? I'm like, what am I now? That's what you go through. That's what it is, and we'll get deeper into that in a second. And then you have a new beginning. And as Bridges argues again in Transitions, they argue that often that beginning will naturally occur when we're doing the messy work, when we're in the in between. It reminds me a lot of the seasons. If you saw the thumbnail, the picture to this, that's why I had a picture of myself with the four seasons here in the United States, where it's like winter, spring, summer, and fall. We're about to enter the fall season in a couple of weeks here in the States. And that's why I mentioned that, where it's almost like in wintertime, those seeds are getting planted, believe it or not, for the spring bloom. It's not like, again, here in the States, it's not like in March or in April when spring begins here in Las Vegas that suddenly the trees start blooming. It's like, oh, trees came out of nowhere. No, actually, those seeds might have been planted as early as the fall, and they sat in the earth, and we didn't see them growing, but they were changing. And then suddenly, we got a sprout. And then before we know it, summertime and everything's green. But it doesn't happen immediately. That messy middle is a really important part of us understanding what goes into um, what goes into a new beginning and what goes into an ending. Often we do the reverse. We want to begin something new, and then when it's over, then we want to wrap it up really quickly. But how you end things, I've learned, is almost as important, maybe even more important than how you begin things, because how you end things kind of sets up the stage for the beginning. How you get ready for things in the fall or in the winter time will dictate how the new beginning begins in the springtime. You can't have one without the other. They're all part of the game. Yeah. Hi, Durad. Thank you for coming through. Woo! Yeah, that is huge. I'm transitioning to full-time professor in person and on campus. That is big. At 3 years of working from home writer slash editor, huge change transition, and I'm feeling it. Yeah. cheers, cheers to you. Some coffee for you. It's such a big part of it. And Duran, I think you're already kind of recognizing it. So I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But just kind of give context for the rest of the audience. It's not just okay, you're going in and you're becoming a in person. professor, and you're commuting and all those things, you're not doing the Zoom calls anymore, or whatever the equivalent is from your home office. It's not just that. And it's not just the logistics of that, not just, you might have to update your wardrobe and stuff. Like, it's not just that, but it's also, again, what's going to stay the same, and you're still going to be professoring. I think that's a verb. We're going to use that as a verb today. You're still going to be professoring, right? Dr. Snyder, I'll call you doctor today, right? And number two, um, what's going to change? Well, what's going to change is that you're going to be doing it in person, and you'll have more socialization with the faculty and of course with the students. But then that third question is, what's going to be the loss? And loss might be you having a little bit less quiet time at home, or you having to be more social if you don't want to be social, or I don't know, maybe more office hours. I don't know, or maybe even the psychological thing of being able to work from home versus having to kind of go out into the world. And depending on part of the United States or the world that you're in, wintertime is going to be coming really soon, so you might not look forward to that. Those are certain losses that are part of that transition. And there's grieving and an emotional part of that, particularly like you said, after 3 years. That's a long time. So you're doing the same thing since 2021. That's a long time. So suddenly you have this lifestyle change. If you have friends or family, then the amount of time you spend with them might be different. It's definitely going to be a different schedule, right? So all those things play into transition. So thank you for your comment, and that's huge. Hopefully, the stuff that we're talking about today and the books I recommend, particularly transitions. Again, I can't speak about this book more. Highly recommend it. All the links are below. Hopefully they'll help you with this transition. It sounds like you can handle the change fine, but transitions, as I mentioned, they tend to get a little bit more complicated. So thank you for your comment. I really appreciate it, Duran. Yeah, and congrats. It sounds like that's the direction you want to go in. Speaking of conversations, um, if you're going through the phases of transition, you're probably going to have to explain it to people. Um, you're going to have to explain it to if you have a long-time partner, explain it to your partner, or even a short-term partner. Explain it to all your partners. You explain it to your family if you have kids or parents or whatever, older adults. You have to explain it to your crew, your friends. You explain it to a lot of folks. That requires, frankly, a level of conflict. It's like that conversation. I know those conversations. I've received those conversations and I've given those conversations where it's like, hey, yeah, I have this great opportunity. It's in a different state. They want me to start right away. Yeah, everybody's moving. Yeah. Are you cool with that? Like, we need to learn how to communicate to each other when those changes happen. And then it allows us to actually deal with the transition. Again, remember, change is external. Change is, I got a new job. It's exactly what I want. It's exactly what our family needs. It's in a whole different state. Transition is, okay, so will the kids feel at home there if you have kids? It's, will I be able to work there just like my partner is? Like all those little details, but they're more on an emotional level. My friend group, well, I still stay connected to them. We're used to getting together and have a drink once a week. How are we going to do that? That's the transition. Again, that's almost like the emotional underbelly of it. To get to the emotional underbelly, you need to have good conversations. I have 2 degrees in journalism, a master's in magazine publishing. I'm so proud of them. When it comes to these crucial conversations, they might as well be useless. Now, I don't have the physical book, but I do have it on Kindle. So unfortunately, I can't show it to you guys. The link is below. There's like 5 authors. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I love all of y'all. It's a fantastic classic book and really good stuff. Worth checking out if you're going to do that. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. And congrats on your change and good luck with your transition. Again, all the links are below. Hopefully, it'll help you with your process as well. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Crucial Conversations, can't recommend the book more. I've heard it recommended over and over again, particularly from coaching folks and people that support people who, have to have tough conversations. Chances are, if you're going through a big change, you're going to have at least one hard conversation. And remember, you have to set yourself up for success when it comes to change. So if you're going through a change, chances are other people around you are going to have to change in some form too. Speaking of change, one good companion to understanding the 3 stages of transition. is why should I change my goals? How to let go of a dream. Really important. I'm a really ambitious person. A lot of y'all that I coach are ambitious, so I know some of y'all are watching right now. Um, and sometimes our goals don't fit us anymore. Sometimes our big dreams don't make any sense anymore. We're going to do all this changing, evolving, growing, mastering things, outgrowing things, and then we're going to have the same goals. It doesn't. If you think about it, from a logical standpoint, it makes no sense. Of course, we're going to have different goals. Of course, we're going to outgrow things. Of course, we're not going to fit anymore. This relatively short video, I'd say like 8, 9 minutes, talks about how particularly ambitious people like myself, perhaps like you, can be in situations where we're looking at a goal to obtain and we're like, oh, I don't want it anymore. And sometimes that can feel like a failure, not because you can't reach the goal, but because it doesn't satisfy you anymore. How do you make peace with that? And sometimes it is a case of you not being able to reach a goal, but maybe you're not reaching a goal because it doesn't make any sense anymore. In other words, it might not be quote unquote your fault. It might not be a failure. It just might not make any sense. If we're going to talk about transition, we have to talk about the process of letting go. That's what this episode talks about. It's one of my favorite episodes, a little bit old school. I think it's from a couple years ago. One of my favorite little episodes, like 8 minutes long. Check it out, particularly if you feel like you're struggling with the concept of particularly transition. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. I help side hustlers, solopreneurs, otherwise non-traditional entrepreneurs like yourself reach their goals, ironically enough, figure out if goals aren't right for you, work on your emotional intelligence so that you can be more connected to yourself and the people that you care about, including understanding your own pathway, and also helping you build passive income in other ways so that you can actually build towards creating something amazing for the world. I want you to have your voice as loud as possible and you impact the communities you want to serve. You can watch this every Wednesday at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You subscribe for free below. This is episode 393. So it's 392 episodes for you to hang out with. So, if you're enjoying the live shows, there's about 100 live shows, and then there's a bunch of recorded shows, interviews with other folks. I think you guys will have a blast. Go and subscribe now, as well as check out the complete Bring Your Worth collection, available everywhere books are sold, as well as you can listen to the audiobook right now after I'm done talking using the link below. And shout out again to Shortform at shortform.com/Damon, Damon, where they're giving you a special discount only for Bring Your Worth TV viewers and listeners, where you can get a free trial to the Ultimate Book Reader Companion, as well as 20% off, as of this recording, off their regular plan. All right, so let's talk about it. Good stuff. How do I handle the in-between time between change and transition? This, my friends, is the hardest part. I'm not gonna lie to you. Cup of coffee for that. This is by far the hardest part, because the challenge that we have is that, particularly, again, speaking for the Western world, know a lot of y'all overseas, you might have different perspectives. Here in North America, particularly the United States and in Canada, we tend to lean towards doing. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. We just lean towards doing. Something's going on, okay, we try to fix it. This is uncomfortable, okay, we're going to do something about it. All right, I don't like where I'm here, okay, well, let me take action. And I meditate most mornings. A couple of my good friends have been Buddhist monks, so I'm familiar with more of the Eastern style of it. And it's interesting to kind of see them clash that discussion and to understand, wait, we don't always have to take action. And remember from the previous section of the show, there are 3 parts based on, again, the transitions model. Shout out to the bridges. The transition model, when we're going through a transition, there's an ending, there's a neutral zone, that messy middle, and then there's a beginning. That neutral zone is key. As I talked about earlier, it's similar to wintertime before the spring blossoms bloom. I'm thinking of Japan and the cherry blossoms. But it's about to get cold in Japan. I've been in there where it's been snow in Tokyo. It gets really cold in Japan if you haven't been there before. So it's like Michigan. So they have their cold seasons, and then it comes up. That neutral zone is that cold season. It's the chrysalis period between the centipede and the butterfly, where things are mushy and gooey and confusing. And boundaries that were there before don't exist, but the new boundaries aren't established yet. I can talk about it all day. I talk about it more in actually my newsletter. You can go to joindamon.me and read my newsletter right now. The link is below. And I talked about it in my weekly newsletter today. Free newsletter comes out every Wednesday morning. But I talk about it extensively. That messy middle is where things start to take shape, but they're below the surface. It reminds me of a fantastic quote from Les Brown, the famed famed speaker that was a couple generations older than me. Hope you're doing well, Les. But I love his work, and he talks about the bamboo tree. And evidently, for the first 5 years of the bamboo tree, once you plant it, you have to water it every single day, and nothing shows up at all. But you have to water it every single day. If you don't water it every single day, it's going to die. But under the surface or on the surface, nothing's happening. So you water every single day. What's that, like 1,500 days or something? Every single day, 3 to 5 years, I believe he said. And then one day it just sprouts up. And suddenly it's this magnificent. If you've seen a bamboo tree, again, speaking of Eastern Asia, if you've seen a bamboo tree, then they're just beautiful and big and massive, taller than me, et cetera, et cetera. That's what the neutral period is like. That's why we have to hang out in that in between time. And there are five disses, DIS, that we experience during the neutral period. And I'm going to get this directly from the book because it's fantastic. I want to make sure that I don't miss one of them. Sorry, amazing silence. I come from a radio background, so so silence is kind of weird. I like silence in my real life, but on the air, it's like, oh my gosh, it's silence. So there's a series of disses that come with it, and some of it actually spills into the ending as well. So this is the ending. Remember, there's three stages: ending, neutral zone, beginning. This is going from the ending to the neutral zone. The first one, there's five disses. Do my fingers right. There's five disses. The first diss is disengagement. Being feeling disengaged from your daily life or your routine. It might be stuff's going on at work, you feel disengaged from work. It could be stuff's going on at home, you feel like whatever the case may be. There's stuff going on in a relationship, you feel disengaged. That's part of the ending process. That's part of the challenge with it. The next one, in no particular order, is dismantling. In other words, you're taking apart, again, those certain boundaries or setups or systems that you had in place before. They don't matter anymore. They don't make any sense anymore. If you're ending something and or in this neutral zone, then you have to dismantle a little bit. Otherwise, it's not really an ending or a new beginning, right? If you end up doing the same, the second verse, same as the first, like what's the point of that? So a certain amount of dismantling that happens. Again, the conversation, crucial conversations, the book link below would help a lot with that. I like this one. Number three is disidentification. In other words, you don't identify with the same thing. And I talked about that a little bit earlier, where if you identify with this particular social group, this group of friends, and then you move, are you still associated with those friends? Now, of course, today we have modern technology, and I have friends literally all around the world at this point. I'm so grateful for it. And we can catch up on all the different platforms. But still, that's not the same as us, sharing a hug and then getting a meal down the street. So there's a certain amount of this identification I have is in that transition where it's like, what is my identity? What is Damon? What do I represent? Who am I? That's part of the confusion. Number four is disenchantment. Disenchantment is basically saying, I believe this was true, but now that this is ending or I'm in this neutral zone, I'm realizing it wasn't true at all or it's not true anymore. I kind of like there is no Santa Claus. And there's a bit of a letdown with it, and maybe even a sadness, maybe even a depression, depending on the heaviness of it. And the last one, number five, It's disorientation. Excuse me, disorientation, as far as not knowing which way is up, which makes perfect sense, right? Because if your beliefs are based on this and those beliefs change, then it's like, well, what do I believe in anymore? Like I don't get it anymore. What do I believe in? So in other words, those are the five disses. That's disengagement, dismantling, disidentification, disenchantment, and disorientation. Those are five stages. Kind of reminds me of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the five stages of grief. I'm sorry, five stages of death, which also can be related to the five stages of grief, as my Freudian slip just said. If we're in those positions and we feel any or all of those things, what I'm trying to say is that that's completely natural and normal. That's okay. That's part of the process. And allowing us to feel those things is really, really important because it basically says, all right, if we're going to feel these different things and we give ourselves permission to do so, then we can allow ourselves to go through that process without the guilt or shame. I was thinking about this earlier today when I was getting ready for this episode, where for me personally, and for a lot of people that I coach, and I think I've coached between 400 and 500 people at this point, and there's a commonality there where when we have the most challenges, it's not usually based on the change. Change is hard, but it's not usually based on the change. It's based on the transition. Remember, change is external, transition has to do with what's going on inside of you. And the challenge still with that transition, it's not usually with the emotions that are around it. The feeling of loss, grief, anger, frustration, disappointment, et cetera, et cetera. I've had a lot of change and transition this year. So if there's this great emotional wheel that a therapist had recommended years ago that I actually bought for my family that I have on a pillowcase. But you ever see that wheel? It's like a color wheel. You know what I mean? Like with swatches and stuff. But each color represents an emotion. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by emotions, you can point to them. So I got it for my kids when they were a few years younger. Worked out really well. They don't need it as much anymore. Thankfully, they're kind of able to articulate their emotions more. But it even helps with us adults. And right, the year that I've had, I felt like I had the wheel of fortune where I was feeling all kinds of stuff with all the changes that have happened in my life. The challenge, though, usually isn't with, again, the change, which is external, but with the transition, the internal stuff. But then on a second layer of that, with the transitions, it's not usually that wheel of fortune of emotions that we feel. It's our feelings that are connected to those emotions. I feel sad about this change, but I feel like I shouldn't feel sad. So I'm not going to allow myself to feel sad. And that last part, I'm not going to allow myself to feel that emotion. That's where our pain is. Very Buddhist philosophy. It's not new, I'm not, this isn't breaking news for Damon, but it's that basic psychology 101. But it's that friction. It's our unwillingness to go through those transitions. It's our unwillingness to admit that we have those feelings because we feel embarrassed or shame. Again, Brene Brown for beginners is right below. You can click the link. Real talk. We end up getting caught up in those things. So not only are we dealing with the change, which is external, and not only are we dealing with the transitions as far as what feelings we're feeling, we'll also have to deal with our feelings about feeling those feelings. And that part right there, our feelings about feeling those feelings, that's where the guilt, the shame, and other things come from. A lot of the coaching I do, we end up working through that at least as much as possible. Because it's not usually about the feelings itself. It's about how we feel towards those feelings. And somewhere along the way, or maybe it's inner dialogue, or maybe because of the situation, we feel embarrassed or feel shame or guilt for having those feelings. So we refuse to address them. And, like Albert Einstein and other people have said in the past, energy can't be destroyed, it just goes somewhere else. So, the body keeps score. The emotions come out in a different way, physically, mentally, emotionally, in some situation where we end up overreacting, but it's really about this other thing. So all that stuff is connected, but it's really about us fighting those things. And a lot of that fighting, frankly, happens in the neutral zone because we don't have anything in particular to do. As I talk about in my book, Career Remix, and it's funny, they had a very similar analogy in the book Transitions. And I had never read the book before, so it's funny, we were thinking the same way. But it's almost like leaving shore for a distant island. And then there's a certain point where you can't see the island in front of you, but then it's too far or it's barely legible or visible as far as the shore that you left. So some people like spend the extra energy to go back to where they came from, but then eventually they're going to have to make that journey. And then sometimes you just need to be bobbing in the middle, continue swimming, stay afloat, doggy paddle if you have to, just stay afloat. And then before you know it, the shore is right in front of you. Just like the bamboo tree. Shout out to Les Brown, that bamboo tree that just pops up at the last minute. Suddenly it's in front of you. And that's a beautiful thing. But you have to trust the process. And on those waves of emotions, sorry for the tortured analogy, but for those waves of emotions, you got to just kind of roll with it. And the more you're able to roll with it, the better off you'll be. A good book to talk about this and to navigate that middle area is called The Creativity Leap by Dr. Natalie Nixon. Shout out to you, Natalie. Hope you're doing wonderful. Fantastic book. One of my favorite books of a couple of years ago. I shout it out many times if you've watched the channel for a while. Dr. Nixon talks about two basic processes that allow us to be creative. And creativity, in my opinion, is life. So it allows us to live our life. It's wonder and rigor. Wonder is, wow, I'd like us to, what would it be like if I lived on Mars one day? Is that going to happen in my lifetime? I wonder what it'd be like if I was the kind of parent where creativity was above everything. And schoolwork and all that, that's great. But it was just, you know, my kids come home and there's a new art project for them to do. Totally surprised. Just go for it. What would it be like if I traveled regularly and I learned to become a DJ and I just explored different areas and had fun and made people dance? That's wonder. I wonder if. That's wonder. Rigor is, okay, so if I'm going to have a new art project for my kids every day, then I better go to the art supply store. I better get a calendar to go ahead and for each day of the week, go ahead and write it down. It's going to require some planning. I better put some money aside because art can get really freaking expensive. So how am I going to do that? The rigor is saying, how am I going to implement it? The wonder is imagination, what if? Rigor is, okay, brass tacks, how's it going to work? This book breaks down. Neither one is right. Now, if you've been watching for a little while from the beginning of the show, I was talking about there being a rider and there being an elephant, as talked about in the fantastic book Switch by Dan and Chip Heath about change. This parallels that. The rider, the person steering, is the rigor. How are we going to implement this? How's it going to work? The elephant, the person, the thing, not person, the thing, elephant's not a person, the thing being ridden is the wonder. What am I passionate about? Where do I want to go? This is where I'm being drawn to. Oh my gosh, there's an animal over there. Oh, it's not really an animal. It's okay. All right, great. I think I want to wander this way. I'm really hungry. Just very much like free spirit, as we used to say back in the day. That's your wonder and your rigor. Implementing and using this book, I think, will be super helpful if you're in that neutral zone, if you're in that messy middle between an ending and a beginning, because you can look at the possibilities. And then which is wonder, and then as you go deeper into it, you can look into the rigor and be like, okay, well, how do I implement this? And maybe the rigor part, frankly, doesn't come till much later. Maybe you're just in the wonder part where you're like, you know what? These boundaries that I had before don't exist anymore. These assumptions that I made don't apply anymore. What exactly can I do now that I wasn't able to do before? And based on that, how can I show up differently? How can I show up better? That's a different vibe. That's the wonder. Sometimes we have changes, and oftentimes we have changes that are out of our control or not the way that we would have planned it or the way we would have liked. I look at the neutral zone, as talked about in transitions, as this kind of middle where it's like everything is possible. It's not turning out the way that you planned it, obviously, but everything's possible. So if everything's possible, then let's just swim in that for a little while. And it's like, oh, we're getting a little bit closer to shore. Well, how can we make this a reality? How practical is this? Dr. Nixon does an excellent job on this. Again, love her book. I read it probably about once a year. Fantastic book. Definitely worth checking out. And I love supporting her work because she does fantastic work outside of this as well. Related to this, one of my other favorite people, Seth Godin. Hope you're doing great. On the Dip and When You Should Quit. One of my earliest Bring Your Worth TV episodes. I think it was like episode 50 or something. Right. Again, less gray hair in the beard. Man, Seth Godin has been a mentor of mine. I have all his books. He has a new book coming out this fall called This Is Strategy. I will talk about it as soon as I get an early copy of it. He's a legend. I got 5 of his books right behind me. This episode is about The Dip, which might be my favorite book of his. Super short book. It's like 45 minutes long. If you click on this episode, I think a link to the book is on the description of the episode. It's about when to quit and when to stick with it. I will not get into that because I will make this a 3-hour program. I could talk about me talking about the dip will be longer than the 45-minute audiobook. I can guarantee you that. I can talk about it all day. But basically, there's a formula you could use to say, okay, should I stick with this or should I let this go? And this doesn't have to do anything with sunk costs. And sunk costs have to do with what you've already invested into it. That's kind of the Trojan horse of this. Is he's saying sunk costs shouldn't be calculated because if it's sunk costs, but it's the wrong path, who cares how much you invested in it already? As they say in that investments, what's it called? Don't throw good money after bad money. That's what that means. You already lost money in it. Okay, the next thing you can do is stop, do something else. He talks about that. I talk about in a much more concise version that I'm doing right now. It's like a 6-7 minute video. It's very, very short, but it's concise, talking about the dip and we should quit. And I break down some of the three best things that he has going on with that. So when do you feel like that you've been in the in between space? Are you in the in between space now? Are you in a place where you've ended something or something has changed? Let me be clear about it. Are you in a position where something's changed, but that new thing hasn't sprouted yet? Are you dealing with that kind of fear that the new thing might not sprout, which is totally natural? And how are you dealing with that fear? Again, I've had a lot of change this year and way more transition. I can relate to that. So, how are you processing that? Or any of the tools or the analogies that I've used today, have you started to practice those before for the program today? Hop into the comments. I'd love to get your take and maybe some type of support that me or the other viewers can give you. Again, my name is Damon Brown. I'm an entrepreneurial coach. I promise I know how to spell it. I'm an entrepreneurial coach helping side hustlers, solopreneurs, otherwise non-traditional entrepreneurs. You're watching Bring Your Worth TV Wednesdays at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You subscribe for free. Again, we're approaching 400 episodes. Go back, enjoy the catalog. I love hanging out with y'all. And the newest book is the Complete Bring Your Worth Collection, 27th book. 8 books are in here. I wasn't playing when I said the collection. Check it out. It's a really good price too. And it's published through Bring Your Worth Publishing. So you'll be supporting the channel as well as my little old publishing company. Oh, if you happen to miss it, you recently did an episode on how to begin freelance writing if you want to become a writer yourself. Coffee break. Cheers to y'all. And shout out to Shortform, shortform.com/Damon, Damon, sponsor of this episode. You can go through there and learn more about the ultimate book reader's companion. Get a free trial and 20% off courtesy of Shortform. And this episode, the big one, how do I determine what's next in my life? So we talked about earlier in the episode, there being endings, there being a neutral zone where things are a little bit confusing and we're not sure what's what. And lastly, there being the beginning. So you get to the beginning, you're like, okay, where do I go from here? You know, I appreciate you, you know, and it's like, where do I go from here? And there's a few ways or a couple ways that I think will help as far as you figuring out what your next step is going to be. As I get my mic right, there we go. Number one is to recognize that everything is temporary. So there's decisions that you will make now that might just cross another bridge. That's it. I have my new office, so I got some new furniture, the new bookcase behind me and all that. And I remember being paralyzed for, I wouldn't say paralyzed, I'm being really dramatic, indecisive, we'll put it like that, for a matter of days, where I was like, well, there's this book. If you ever look up a bookcase, there's like a million different places you can get them and all that stuff. And I'm looking at bookcases, and if any loved ones are watching right now, thank you for your patience. Because I was pinging some of y'all like, well, I'm thinking about this one, but maybe this one, maybe this one, particularly since it would also be for obviously for the TV show. So it's different dimension because I know I have a regular show and I'd be connected with y'all. So I'm like, I want it to be, and I haven't bought a new bookcase in like years and it's a new office. You want every single piece to be represented. And then it hit me one day where I was like, okay, like number one, this is going to be the last bookcase I buy. Hopefully not. Hopefully I have a lot more life to live. I was like, number two, bookcases aren't, they can be very expensive. I mean, I saw some bookcases that looked gorgeous, but they were literally in the four figures. I am not kidding. I Yeah, I guess if I was well into the millionaire status, then I would have $1,000 bookcase. I'm not at that point yet. I'm like, I have other things I would rather focus on. My point is that a lot of these bookcases are well within the price range of my business. So it's like, just get a bookcase. If you don't like it, then put it in the other room or give it to some. It'll be okay. This is a temporary choice. It's an important choice, but it's a temporary choice, as opposed to where my office is going to be located. So me actually finding the location of my office and the right price and all that, that's way more important. So if you're looking at the next stage in your life or after a major change, recognize that most things are temporary. You can have a bookcase right now and then get another one next year after you get settled in. It'll be fine. It'll be okay. Because sometimes that pressure ends up keeping us in that neutral zone where we don't do anything longer than we should. Remember, with the book transitions, again, shout out to the bridges. There's three parts to transitions. There's an ending, there's a neutral zone, and there's a beginning. The neutral zone is that place where you want to hang out just long enough to get your bearings. That's why they use the term bearings. That's to do with sailors and getting your bearings, you know, while you're at sea. So the water analogy works as far as you swimming from one island to the next. You're swimming from one island to the next. Wait until you get your sea legs. Wait until you get your bearings. And you get your bearings. You're like, oh, this is what I want. It starts to come together. But it's the other side of it where you want to make sure you don't just stay in the neutral zone. You actually, at a certain point, do have to make a move. Speaking of Seth Godin, I talked about him in an earlier segment. He has his book is called he has a lot of books, but I think his book is called The Icarus Fallacy. I think it's called Fallacy, but it has to do with Icarus. And I love Greek mythology. I have like three Greek mythology books right behind me. I love all mythology, but Greek is my favorite. Excuse me. And Icarus, as you might remember from college, or if you're into Greek mythology, is was fashioned wings made out of wax to escape a dangerous island from his father Daedalus. Daedalus was the designer. He designed the wax wings, and he said, "Icarus." And I'm a dad, so I'm put on my father voice. Talking to my son, it's like Icarus. We're gonna go ahead. We're gonna fly out, but don't fly too high, otherwise the wax is gonna melt, and then you're going to die. I want you to live. I got my wings on. We're gonna make it out this island. So he's like, yeah, bet, Dad. Sounds good. Like, okay, great. He flies too high. He falls to his doom. I think it's called the Icarian Sea. I believe that's how it's pronounced, right? Which is why it's called the Icarian Sea because he fell into that sea over in the Mediterranean. The Icarus fallacy talks about in Seth Godin's book. He talks about the opposite also being true, which isn't in the mythology, and he's correct. Where if he got too close to the water, which remember it's salt water, then the wax would start to deteriorate based on the salt on the water, and then he'd fall into the water too. So if you aim too high, then you're going to melt. But if you aim too low, staying in that neutral zone, then you're going to crash. That's what he talks about in the Icarus fallacy. Again, I keep up feeling like I got the name wrong, but it begins with Icarus. You can look it up. Again, love all his books. That's one of them that's really good. The point is this, is that everything is temporary. You can change your mind. Almost everything. There's certain things that are like either you're in or you're out, right? Most things in life are not like that. So give yourself a break. This might be good for right now. This bookcase might be good for right now. In this season, this bookcase is perfect. Next season, maybe not. But I didn't pay that much for the bookcase. I could afford it. It worked within the business budget. It works. Okay. This works fine for the neutral zone going into the new beginning. And assume that the rest is going to be coming together. The other part of it, which gets into Adam Grant's work, is to reconsider your assumptions. If you're coming out of an ending from a transition standpoint, you're coming from an ending, you made peace with your ending, you're like, yeah, I made peace with that as much as possible. It sucks with that change, but I made peace with it from a transition standpoint. There's nothing I can do about it. I've learned to let it go. Okay, now I'm in the messy middle where I'm processing a lot of those feelings, but I think I'm okay. It makes zero sense. And we talked about this at the top of the show. It makes zero sense for you to go and do the exact same thing that you just ended. There's a great line in transitions. And let me see if I can find it really quickly. As you can tell, I'm a fan of this book in a ridiculous kind of way. Um, yeah, I will go ahead and I will summarize it because it's going to take me a little while to actually find the passage. But the short version of it is that if we don't actually process our transitions as well as possible, then we'll find ourselves in the same situation when we do that new beginning. It'll just be with different actors. So if you feel like you're being persecuted in a certain situation, or you feel like you are domineering a certain situation, or you feel like that you're unloved in a certain situation, and that situation changes. Again, remember, change is external, transitions are internal. That situation changes for good, for better, for whatever the situation is. It just changes. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad or whatever. If you don't allow yourself to go through that ending, and more importantly, to go through that neutral zone, then when you begin something again, you're going to end up having the same people. Now, people talk about that with karma, and I'm into a lot of the spiritual stuff. I've heard that discussion, but it's not even spiritual, it's just psychological because you haven't processed the stuff from the previous change. So you're going to be literally building the same thing over again. I want more for you. 100%. That's why I do this work. If you're going to go through a painful change, if you're going to say, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working, and you finally get what seems like what you want by this thing ending, it makes no loving sense for you to go and create the same situation over again. The best way to prevent that, from my understanding, I'm not a psychologist, but the best way to prevent that, from my understanding and my experience and working with other people, is to process that transition, those feelings, that stuff in the messy middle as much as possible. I'm talking about the emotional stuff, not the practical stuff, not the I'll deal with it later, not the let's move on, it's a new chapter. I mean, really processing that. Because the more you can process that, the pain, the struggle, the guilt, the shame, whatever it is, again, the Brene Brown stuff, the Brene Brown video, and the 45-minute video that's related to that, that a lot of y'all been watching recently. The link is below. I talk about all this. If you're able to process all that stuff as much as possible, as much as you can, and you're like, I can't process anymore, the faster I think you will actually get to the point where that new beginning will be there, and it'll be a real new beginning. It won't be a remix of what you just did. Life is too short for that. So deal with your crap now. I know I am. I wouldn't be able to be as passionate as I am right now if I wasn't dealing with my own crap. And you won't be in it alone because all of us are dealing with our own crap. The books that I recommended are a big part of that. They've helped me a great deal this year. Maybe I'll do a part two of this in the future because there's so much good stuff out there that can help us on our journey. My guy, Think Again by Adam Grant. Hope you're doing wonderful, Adam. Um, One of my favorite books from one of my favorite authors. Think Again. I was looking for my physical copy, but I think I mixed it up. Ironically, when I was doing this change, not the transition, but doing this change to this new office, I have it somewhere around here. I read it to death. Like I read it like 3 times. Fantastic book. Think Again is basically like this. We've been taught to trust our gut and trust our feelings and all that. I've written books about that and all that. No shots at myself. Just that's been the nomenclature. That's been the zeitgeist, whatever fancy word you want to use. That's what the talk has been for years. At least as long as I've been a business author. What he's basically said when this book came out 2 years ago, what he basically said was like, no, actually, you need to question your assumptions because they're assumptions. And what we consider intuitions are actually based on outdated patterns. So how are we going to deal with that? Fantastic book. I could not find that book, as I said, but I do have a copy of his latest book, Hidden Potential: The Science of Achieving Greater Things. I'm actually still working on this book, but that'll be my next book that I'll be reading later on. I've had so many books. Again, shout out to Shortform. A lot of the books I'm talking about are available on there. Shortform.com. That's Damon, Damon. Thank you for sponsoring the episode. But, Think Again is available on there. But he basically asked you to question your assumptions and to pause on that. And that's really, I think, what you want to do as you start your new beginning from a transition standpoint is to say, what did I assume the last time around? Okay, well, that might be true. That might not be true. Let's think about that one. And my most popular video about Adam Grant is um, Adam Grant Languishing, 3 TED Talk takeaways. The pandemic hit, of course, in late 2019, hit everywhere in 2020. And then in 2021, 2022, it might have been 2022. No, it's 2021. And late 2021, second half of the year, TED actually reopened again. Very limited space because obviously we're dealing with a lot of stuff at the time. And yeah, I was able to come up to Monterey, California, and see Adam do this TED talk about languishing. And languishing is this kind of uncomfortable space, back to neutral zone. It's uncomfortable space where you can't necessarily take action right away, and your next step isn't built yet. Very appropriate. Again, there's a reason why transitions and the creativity leap needed more arms and switch. It's why a lot of their language overlaps. It's because we're all dealing with the same stuff. Adam, again, was talking about this 2, 3 years ago, but he was talking about it in regards to us being knee deep into the pandemic. And we weren't sure when it was going to end. If you remember 2021, if you're around that time, it was a rough time because we have our issues now, but we know that it's coming in waves, or for some people, it's concluded, all that stuff. At 2021, it was like, this might be the rest of our lives. So it was a great time to have that discussion. And that's the deep part is that, as I've talked about in, again, the complete Bring Your Worth collection, all the links are below. What if you're in this situation and you feel like that it's going to be forever? There's certain changes that happen that are forever. My gray hair isn't going to turn black unless I get from some Just for Men or something. Like time doesn't go in reverse. That's one example of that. That changes forever. There's only one way out, right? My whole point is that most of these changes, though, they feel like they're going to be forever. Most of these transitions, the internal work, it feels like it's going to be forever. And sometimes it sucks. You're like, I feel lost. Well, I feel lost for the rest of my life. And in most cases, especially if you allow your emotions to flow through, the answer is no. You're not always going to feel that way. That's guaranteed. Death, taxes, and new emotions. There's only three things we can count on in this life. And so if you're feeling lost, you're feeling confused, if you're in this neutral zone where you're like, I don't want to feel these feelings anymore, you probably will not feel those feelings forever. Chances are extremely low. Even I think about loved ones that I've lost, people that were my heart, and the amount of pain when they went away just whew, seemed insurmountable. And now I could talk about it. I've talked about it on the show. That doesn't mean that they're forgotten. It doesn't mean the pain is any less. It just means new emotions have come in. And it's almost like a transformation or a transition. Almost like a transformation that happens with those emotions. But you have to give enough space for those transformations to happen. And if you don't give that space for those transformations to happen, how are those emotions going to transform? It's almost like sometimes we're afraid of our emotions. So then we don't deal with our emotions. And those emotions become the thing that we actually feared. Yeah, real talk. All this emotional stuff. Again, I can't highlight this video more, especially after this conversation. Begin Emotional Intelligence, Brene Brown for Beginners. It covers most of my most popular Brene Brown episodes. Some great quotes from her, some insights. I've seen her TED Talks live. I've DM'd with her in the past. So I'm not in her circle, but I'm familiar with her philosophy extremely well. Hopefully, that will help you guys get through this neutral zone because beginnings and endings, they can be rough, but that neutral zone, that's why I want to dedicate so much time to it. Really big part of the process. So, how are y'all getting ready for your next step? Are you getting ready for your next step? Are you more in a neutral zone where you can't even see the next step? How are you processing that day to day? Feel free to jump in the comments. This is a live show, so you're watching it live. Cool. Feel free to jump on the comments. But, you know, this is one of the 400 episodes of Bringing Worth TV. So even after this goes live and it's recorded, feel free to jump into the comments and share the transitions you're going through. Love to hear it, and you might be able to help someone else along the way. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. If you want to work with me, I'm at damonbrown.net. You can learn more about my books, my work, my coaching practice, and how I might be able to support you in other ways. You're watching Bring Your Worth TV every Wednesday at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You can subscribe for free. I'll tell you episode 400. Enjoy the content. I made it for y'all. No use in it sitting there. And the complete Bring Your Worth collection, my latest book, is out now. You can actually get it wherever books are sold, including at damonbrown.net. And you can go ahead and listen to the audiobook, not only at your favorite audiobook provider, but also right here at bringyourworth.tv. The link is literally right there. 8 hours of, I think it's 7 books in there, 7 or 8 books. Where else are you going to get this? Enjoy it. Enjoy it for sure. Thank you for watching today's show, 5 Secrets to Mastering Change and Transition. Remember that change is stuff that happens to you or stuff that's external. Transition is how you respond to it, and it's the stuff that's internal. You learn that, you've got half the battle already done. Much love to y'all. Remember, you can always bring your worth. You can always build from now. Take care of yourselves and others.